All right, nice to see you guys. Great to be at the Future Music Camp, and also great to be back in Mannheim. I spent 9 years here as a student, and then working for the Pop Academy. I was never been anywhere as long as I've been here. Obviously, we're going to do this in English. I don't know why we decided to do it this way, so I hope you're fine with that. I brought with me a somewhat complex, but nonetheless very important topic, and we're going to think about alternative payment models for music streaming. And specifically, that's what the study was about that I have been working on together with PRO Music, specifically about the user-centric payment system as a payment model. I want to start with a quick intro about myself, but also, David just mentioned it, many thanks to PRO MUSIK, the PRO MUSIK Verband, an association for musicians in Germany. They've been instrumental in helping fund the project, and I've helped with contacts and press promotion, everything. I myself have done a couple of things within the music industry after I left Mannheim. I headed the business intelligence and data analytics unit at Sony Music in Germany. For more than 6 months, I worked on an analysis about what user-centric could mean for Sony Music in New York. And for now, I've been like more than 1.5 years. I've been working on this study because I think it is one of the, if not the most important topic for musicians, artists, and songwriters as well. Currently, just as a disclosure, so you know, like about half a year ago, I joined BMG as Senior Director of Business Development for YouTube. Has nothing to do with the study, but that's what I decided to do, and then decided to join the great team at BMG. All right, so I just want to show you throughout this journey, it's been in total more than 2 years, who we've talked to. We've talked to basically all of the music associations in Germany that you will know. We talked to international societies as well. We've been in touch with the lobbying organizations that represent streaming services in Germany and abroad. We'd also got in touch with all the relevant streaming services. So we've talked to all these folks, not to say whether they are pro or against user-centric or any particular model, but this conversation is happening everywhere at these places. My goal for today, specifically in terms of the musicians and artists among you in the audience, is to convince you, if you talk about music streaming, stop talking about a per stream rate. It has no impact on your finances. What matters is how all of the money from music streaming, premium music streaming, is split between artists. So I would really want to encourage you, start talking about payment models rather than, for example, the per stream rate. That's something I'm going to try to convince you of with my talk today. So what is a payment model? What do we mean by that in this context for the study and in general? This is a very simple version of the way money flows in music, in premium music streaming. It's about how much the subscribers pay for a subscription. It's about how much the streaming services keep for themselves. It's about how much they pay out to the rights holders, such as labels. And then ultimately, it's also about how much a rights holder like a label will share with their artists. We're going to focus on the question, how much of the money that a streaming services pays out on behalf of the artists to the rights holders, and how this money is allocated and split between artists. So if a streaming service keeps 30%, for example, how is the rest, the 70%, split between artists? The same is true for songwriters as well. I'm going to use the term artists for this talk. So what's the current payment model? How do we split the premium streaming subscription revenue pie today? It is called the pro rata model. and it's based on an artist's share of total streams on a platform like, for example, Spotify. So an easy example, this would be really good if you would get 1% of all streams on Spotify. But just to keep the example simple, if you get 1% of all streams on a streaming service, you receive 1% of all the subscription revenue. It's a bit simplified, but this is basically how it works. So all of the subscription money goes into one single big pool of revenue, and then we decide how to split that between the artists. So what is the potential problem, potential issue with the way we're doing it today? I'm going to have a very extreme example, just to get the emotions going, to get the blood flowing a little bit. Anybody of you heard of the artist Granular? Show of hands. You've heard of him? What does he do? He does. So you just killed my whole slide. I was gonna do an interpretation of his music or her music. I don't know, but we can skip that. Yeah, I was gonna go with shh, and the second track is shh. So these are the two most popular songs: White Noise Track A, White Noise Track B. Do you know how many streams those tracks have on Spotify? No? Yeah, track A has 610, track B 490. The joke was going to be this is actually millions, so those two tracks alone have 1.1 billion streams on Spotify since release to date. Does anybody know how many streams Michael Jackson's Beat It has on Spotify? Do you know?
I'm not 100% sure, but it's less than you would think, like quarter billion?
It's more than you would think, but still less than Granular's two top tracks, so 0.9 billion. Now, you can't read the little text on the screenshots. The monthly listeners is interesting to compare. Granular has about 460,000 monthly listeners, whereas Michael Jackson's profile has 36 million monthly listeners. An even more extreme comparison is the followers. Granular has 4,000 followers. Michael Jackson's profile has 27 million followers. But we're just looking at two tracks and one Michael Jackson track, but you can see how it looks in streams versus listeners versus followers. So the ultimate question is, right now with pro rata, are we getting or is the allocation right? Whatever that means. Some people say fair. I don't like the term fair. So is total streams, the way we do it right now, the ideal way to measure success in music streaming, to represent value and consumer demand, and ultimately, is it the right way to allocate revenue? So I just want to have one slide of, again, trying to convince you of how relevant the topic is, how big of a discussion it is if you haven't come across it so far. There's been a lot of criticisms towards the current model pro rata, and some parties have explicitly advocated for user-centric. Examples are the artist-driven campaigns like the Broken Record campaign, fixed streaming, just as at Spotify or in Germany a couple of years ago, the Fair Share Initiative. Even the British Parliament did an inquiry, an investigation of the economics of music streaming, and they interviewed publicly major labels, streaming services, and so on user-centric specifically as well. You had, this is well-known, Deezer advocating for a user-centric model for years, even though they haven't implemented anything. SoundCloud last year has implemented user-centric as they call it the fan-powered royalties program. They won Warner Music as the first major label to participate in that user-centric model. Recently, they added Merlin as top representative of independent labels as well. And even this lady, her name is Kim Bailey. She's chief executive of basically a lobbying organization for streaming services, among others, in the UK. And she said, we need to move on from saying that we're open-minded about user-centric to actually doing the homework on what its impact would be. This guy, Garrett Levin, is CEO of the Digital Media Association, representing streaming services around the world. And he, again, said, together, we should further explore alternative payment models, such as user-centric. So I didn't put one of Lucian Grange's quotes in here. He had an email at the end of last year that went public the beginning of this year about an artist-centric model. So it's on the map for the music industry officially this year again. Okay, but what is user-centric as an alternative to a pro rata? So what user-centric is, in a simple explanation, is it's not based on the total stream, your share of total streams on the platform. It's based on an artist's share of streams per user. So instead of having one big pie where all the revenue goes in and then allocating that, you basically have a revenue pie per user. So if you could get, as an artist, 10% of a user's subscription fee, or that part that is paid out towards artists, 10% of that. If you have 10% of that user's streams, you could get 25% of the subscription fee from another user. And if you're not streamed by a third user, obviously you don't get any part of that subscription fee, and so on and so forth. So why should artists care about payment models and about user-centric specifically? There are other measures. There's a lot of discussions in music streaming, as you'll be aware of. Basically, all this, the steps in the money flow, the value chain, how much should people pay for their subscriptions, how much should Spotify, etc., keep for themselves, how much should the record deals between labels and artists, should they get fair? What these measures have in common is that they add a bit of revenue, 5%, 10%, maybe 15% for all artists. And the unique thing about the payment model, changing the payment model, is you can get much more revenue, but only for certain artists. But the reason you should care is because there's potential for artists to get a lot more revenue, more than with other measures. And I'm going to obviously have some numbers from the study to back that up. Okay, transitioning to the results of the study. The study is called Payment Option Transparency. And I'm going to start with the platform level, which is on the streaming service level across all artists, because actually there's not much has been communicated so far from the research community and within the industry about that top level overall impact. There's been a French study. One of their conclusions was that you would get €8 more annually on average for mid-sized and small artists, which is nothing, which is why a lot of people concluded user-centric wouldn't change a lot. The University of Hamburg conducted a study. They estimated that €170 million would be redistributed between artists globally for Spotify. And so based on our study, A, we think that the French study is pretty misleading in terms of the impact, and B, we believe that the University of Hamburg is underestimating the actual impact that user-centric would have. So our payment option transparency POT study, what we find is that potentially a quarter of all subscription revenues could be distributed between artists. This is based on SoundCloud data. So there's no way we can know how it would be on Spotify, on YouTube, Apple Music, and so on. But if it were similar on these other services across the market, in Germany alone, this would amount to more than 160 million euros being shifted around from certain artists to others. So The right conclusion in our, based on our analysis, is not that user-centric wouldn't change a lot. The impact would actually be very significant. And that obviously begs the question: if there's a lot going on overall, would you, as an artist, benefit? So what we looked at is how many artists would profit, and our results, again based on SoundCloud data, is that almost 1 in 3 artists would gain 40% in revenue, at least, or more. In fact, 1 in 5 artist profiles would actually at least double their streaming revenue and their streaming income, which is something completely different than 8 euros per year more, of course. But, and I highlighted this with the unique thing about payment models, it can be much more, but for certain artists. The flip side of the coin is that, based on our numbers, more than 1 in 3 artists would lose 40% or more in revenue. So to have a first quick summary in between about the platform level results, the impact overall would be significant for many artists. It can be positive and negative, but there's a good chance for you as an artist, a musician, or songwriter that you would profit, which is about 1 in 3. It also leads to a key question, or 2 key questions. If there's significant impact, but it can be positive and negative, how do you decide whether user-centric is favorable? And so the way we try to address that is by identifying and explaining the types of artist profiles that would benefit. Why are we calling it artist profiles? Because of granular and other profiles, which we probably wouldn't say they're artists traditionally. And there's a lot of them out there in the streaming space. So what we do basically for the first time is we identify the 3 factors of user-centric. And so what they are, they're the characteristics that determine whether an artist profile benefits or not from user-centric. And if you, as an artist or a profile, perform well across these 3 factors, user-centric will reward you with more revenue. Or it will take, if you perform bad, it will take revenue away from you. Factor A, and so this is all based in math, and it's not even, it doesn't matter that it's SoundCloud data and what the size of the sample is. This is just pure math. It's just, remixing the formula to make it more understandable. So these conclusions are true across all platforms and across all markets. And there's been studies that have looked at the average or aggregated impact on music genres or frontline versus catalog and so on. The important takeaway is that there's no real connection between a music genre, for example, or whether it's frontline or catalog, and the impact. There are some patterns and extreme examples, but what it really comes down to are these 3 factors. So factor A is what we call the relative user reach of an artist profile. That is your users or listeners, but not as a total number, but in relation to your streams. And I have an example. So one artist has 10 million streams. Another artist, or a profile like Granular, also has 10 million streams. Under pro rata, right now they would receive the same amount of revenue, as it's just based on their share of total streams. The difference between these artists in this example is artist A, those 10 million streams are generated by 100,000 users, and for artist B, those 10,000 streams come from 2 million users. So artist A has a relative user reach of 10. This is 10 users per 1,000 streams. And artist B has a relative user reach that is 20 times higher than that of artist A. So what user-centric does is, when streams are equal, it rewards artists that reach more listeners at the same time. So the goal of the study is we're not going to decide. We don't advocate for or against user-centric or anything, because that's not our place. All we can do is educate and try to explain this. So what we try to do to enable artists and anybody in the industry to come to a conclusion whether they think user-centric could be favorable. What we do is we translate these factors into simple questions. And for relative user reach, the question is do you think the following is favorable? If two artists have the same number of streams, should the artist that has more listeners be financially rewarded? And this is the first incentive of user-centric. Whereas in pro rata, you're only incentivized for streams. So your goal is maximize streams. For under user-centric, a second incentive is there. You also want to and have to reach more listeners to get more revenue. And there's going to be a lot of information on the next slide. There's only a simple point I want to make, just so you don't think we're pulling this out of thin air. It's actually based in math and real data. This shows how user-centric is actually moving money around based on these factors. So on the left, you have artist profiles with relatively low user reach, and on the right, you have artist profiles with relatively high user reach. And you can see the gray area is the pro rata income of this artist, and the blue area is the user-centric revenue. So you can basically see how user-centric moves money away from artist profiles with low relative user reach to artist profiles with a higher value on that metric. I have another extreme example. I have granular in there as well. This is pulled from Chartmetric. It's the Spotify popularity, the stream popularity between 0 and 100. So you have granular in there with 67. You got Heavenly Lullaby, for kids and babies. You have kids audio. You have crime, and then on the bottom, you have for more familiar names. They all have around. It's not an exact representation of their streams. It's a mixed calculation, but they have similar stream popularity according to Spotify. For relative user reach, what you do is you look at the monthly listeners as a comparison, even though this is a simplification, but you can see that the familiar names have way more listeners, so they will have a higher relative user reach, and user-centric would be moving money away from the profiles on the bottom right into that direction. Now, this is, again, a very extreme example of selected example. There's a lot of gray in between Heavenly Lullaby and Granular and Good Charlotte, but just to make this point. All right, factor A was relative user reach. Factor B we call the average user commitment, and that is actually the most relevant, most important, most impactful characteristic. This impacts the user-centric results the most. And what it is it's your stream share for your users. So if you have 5% of one user's streams and 1% of another user's streams, your average user share will be 3%. That's the number we're looking at. Your stream share averaged across all of your listeners. Again, an example. So you have one user listening to an artist 100 times, and you have another user listening to a different artist 100 times. In this simplistic example, under pro rata, again, these artists would get the same amount of revenue. It's not entirely true, but it's, have to simplify. The difference here is that user A has 100 streams in total. So that user's commitment in streams towards that artist is 100%. And the second user has 1,000 streams in total. So that user's commitment towards artist B is only 10%, even though they both listen to these artists 100 times. So what user-centric does is it rewards artists whose users listen less to other content. Again, we're going to translate this into question: is the following favorable in your view, in your opinion? Should the artist with higher focus among its users be financially rewarded? So this is the second incentive that UCPS would put in place. So you have pro rata, which is very singular, very easy to understand also. There's one incentive: maximize streams. That's it. That impacts your revenue. User-centric, you gotta generate streams, but you also gotta reach more listeners, and you have to have and achieve a high user commitment among those users. And again, you can see how user-centric moves money. Again, a gray area is pro rata revenue, and blue is user-centric revenue. User-centric moves revenue away from artist profiles with low user commitment. This is again SoundCloud data. So there's 10% of artists on the bottom left that have an average user commitment of 0.5%, meaning that their users listen to more than 99% to other stuff. On the other end of the scale, you have artist profiles who make up almost 30% of their users' consumption. And user-centric moves money along this dimension, from artists with low commitment to artist profiles with high commitment. The last factor of those three is the easiest to explain. We call it the average user spend, and it's basically how much an artist's listeners pay for their subscription. This depends on exactly how the streaming services pool the revenue. If they have one pool per different subscription, like for $4.99 and $9.99, this factor is not even there. But if they pool all the different prices into one pool, this is the third factor. And then it matters when everything else is equal, user-centric rewards artists whose listeners pay higher fees. Again, we're gonna translate this into a question. Should the artist whose users are willing to pay more into the streaming system be financially rewarded? And this is the third incentive. So any payment model doesn't have to be user-centric. Anything else you introduce has its own set of incentives. And pro rata is very singular, very simple. Maximize streams. User-centric streams, yes, but also more listeners, more commitment among those users, and also you're rewarded if those users pay more money. So you want to be listened to by users that pay more in subscription fees. And again, you can see how user-centric moves revenue away from artist profiles with low-paying listeners, subscribers, over to artist profiles that pay more in their subscription fees. So back to the key questions. We illustrate, explain what types of artist profiles benefit and which don't, and hope to give you a methodology with this study to make up your own mind of whether you find that favorable compared to pro rata or not. And the basic logic is, if you find all these three factors, these three new additional incentives favorable, find they make sense, technically you should be pro user-centric. If you don't agree with one or more incentives, you might be against it. Just want to note here, this is all a short-term financial impact analysis. There's a lot more to think about, but I'm leaving it out of this this talk, but for the conversation. And the underlying question, again, it's how to measure success in music streaming. What should you financially reward artists for? And what's the best way to represent user demand and value? And I think actually it's the first time that the music community and music industry really has to have this discussion and really decide what set of incentives would enable the creation of valuable music and content, however we decide to do that. So what can an artist do? And I'm going to keep this very simple. Educate yourself. You can read other studies. I hope you're going to read the payment option transparency study. We're probably going to put it online this weekend or early next week. The website is paymentoptiontransparency.com or .de. And try to take that in and learn about these incentives and what it could mean for you as an artist. Very important, engage your partners, talk to your management, your label. If you think it's important, if you think it'll be important for you to potentially earn 40% more revenue, tell them it's important and ask them what they plan to do about this. They don't have to be pro or against it, but it would be important to know how they represent you and what their position is. But also, they can help you to request transparency, because one of the things our studies has shown is it's not that complicated to calculate user-centric impact at the artist level. And all it really needs, I know it sounds like far away, but all it really needs is the willingness of streaming services to provide that data or to provide the calculated results. And so rather than asking for a new payment model right now, like user-centric, I think it's a lot more important that you educate yourself, go to your partners, and see if they're willing to represent you, and go to the streaming services and request transparency. All right, I'll conclude my talk for today with a few takeaways. The first one is nothing new. Premium streaming is, for many, the biggest source of revenue. That's why it's important. User-centric and potentially other models can produce the highest gain in revenue, again, for certain artists, not all of them. User-centric impact is not marginal. This is what a lot of people took away from previous research. It is not marginal. It would be a significant impact. Make this a priority, tying back to my goal I mentioned initially. Make this a priority in discussions with your fellow artists and with anybody else you talk about music streaming. Forget talking about per stream rate. It does not matter. Talk about how the revenue is allocated and the rules that govern that. Leverage your partners and claim your, what I call, right to know. I personally think that for such a huge pool of revenue, an artist and a songwriter should have the right to know, this is what I get under pro rata, this is what I would get under a user-centric model, this is what I would get under something, a different model. How would that impact me? But this right does not exist right now. This is something ultimately you and whoever represents you would need to claim and request. And then, very importantly, there's more options than user-centric. A lot of people are calling for, instead of counting streams, using listening, the actual listening time as a criteria, or to distinguish between active and passive listening and applying different weights so that active listening, active consumption counts more for the revenue allocation than passive listening. And also, the user-centric model that we looked at, that everybody's been talking about, is using the stream count, but you could also, like your stream share for every user, but you could also do a user-centric model that uses listening time, your listening time share, instead of stream share, and also apply weights for active and passive listening time, for example. So there's a whole bunch of options, and you can mix different things together. This is very important to keep in mind. And I alluded to this a couple minutes ago. This is purely financial impact, and it's very important to understand. But no matter what and how you change the payment model, it would change the music culture, because it will change everything along the value chain, all creative and business processes, starting with songwriting, producing, A&Ring, talent scouting, all the way to investments, marketing strategies, fan relationships. Everything would need to change, because now you don't only want to maximize streams, you want to get more listeners that pay more. You want to have a user commitment, and that can be high for a user that does not have a lot of streams. So it would change basically everything in terms of how you make revenue and all tactics involved. Last point, which I think is important, payment models are not only relevant for premium music streaming, but for most future revenue sources. The only scenario where you do not need a payment model is when a fan pays 10 euros to a specific artist. Then you do not need to calculate anything. But as soon as you have a pool of revenue that you need to decide how to split, you need a payment model. So for example, Epic Games a couple weeks ago announced that it would be sharing 40% of their revenue with creators of islands in Fortnite. So they will have to decide, and they will base that on island engagement. So they will need to decide how much money of those 40% we're paying out will a particular island get. If you run a particular island and you have multiple creators and artists doing stuff on the island, you'll have to figure out how much money will any creator, any artist get, any songwriter, and so on. So this is, I think, very important. And it's not just relevant for premium music streaming. It's not even just relevant for music, just any creative content out there. If you have a pool of revenue, you need a payment model. All right. So again, huge thanks to PRO MUSIK. They've done a great job, a really awesome partner, and stuck with me the whole way and helped the study and this vision come into action. Visit the website in a couple of days, paymentoptiontransparency.com. Thank you very much. I've run over time. Maybe we have time for one or two questions. Thanks.
All right. Are there any questions from the audience? First one I saw is back here, but maybe the microphone was on its way elsewhere. Okay, yeah.
Hello. Thanks for your very interesting talk. I have the question, how do you evaluate the lack of transparency that goes hand in hand with user-centric payment? Because I imagine, right now with the pro rata system, I have the option to see how many streams I make every month on Spotify, for example. I can see how many streams I made yesterday, for example. And based on my streaming history, I know more or less what I get per stream. And also I have the option in my streaming report to see basically the streaming rate per territory. So if you have the user-centric payment system, basically that falls away completely and you have no option to calculate how your revenue consists, you know what I mean? You basically lose all transparency, and also now I know, okay, I don't know, I made 200,000 streams this month, so in 3 months more or less I'm going to make this amount of money. But if we switch to user-centric, that completely falls away, and I have no transparency whatsoever to calculate more or less my revenue. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I absolutely know what you mean. I think we need to distinguish between transparency and complexity, because you can be transparent about the payouts in pro rata, you can be transparent about the payouts in user-centric. The thing is, it's going to be a lot more complex because it's not just one metric that factors into how much money you receive. It's going to be, in this case with user-centric, 3 or 4 things. And what you're absolutely right about is that whereas now, even though the per stream rate is a fictional calculation, it's nice to have, and it sort of looks like reliable. And for predicting revenue, if you want to sign a particular artist, it helps. So it's definitely an issue of understanding it, and that includes predicting revenue, for example. And this is something I was alluding to. It's not just about the financial impact. There's also other things to consider. And this sort of complexity is certainly one thing you would have to deal with. But it's essentially of trying to understand the YouTube algorithm and what will happen if you release something. Even if we'd have more transparency about how the algorithm works, it would still be very complex to understand. But it would be, the reality. And if you would like to have good partners and find good partners that help you make sense of it. But you're totally right. It would be a lot more complex. And the question is whether it's worth that complexity overall.
Yeah, microphone is already on its way. That's why.
Yeah, thank you also for your talk. I wanted to ask are there right now any distributors that use user-centric, you said?
User-centric, yeah.
Yeah, user-centric. And if not, do you think they are willing to use it? Because I think now for artists, the streams or like the view per streams is important right now, because that's like the actual money they get paid from these streaming platforms. And I mean, artists are fighting for, I don't know, to get like 0.005% instead of 0.003%, and like the streaming platforms aren't like willing to even do that. And if like user-centric is willing to, I don't know, pay even more the artists, like I think it's like a hypothetical thing maybe, because like of course like the artists can be pro for user-centric, but like do they have any influence to it? Because like if the streaming platforms say no, we don't want to use it, then also the artists are dependent of the streaming platforms paying out basically the artist maybe like per stream or something. So yeah.
So where am I going to start? So I think it was your second question. The user-centric model is not going to pay more in total to artists, to the whole group of artists and songwriters. That the money that's paid out is going to stay the same. It's just going to shift around. Some artists will get more, some less, and that could have a positive impact or a negative one. The per stream rate discussion, which you alluded to, like can I get 0.9 instead of 0.3 or whatever? Again, it's you can't do that and have a subscription service and all you can stream service at the same time. It economically, mathematically does not work. That's why it does not make sense to ask for that from like a conceptual view. You can, try to get that implemented into law, but then streaming service will have to find a way to upcharge that to their listeners potentially, because conceptually, mathematically, you can't do both at the same time. And in user-centric, actually, there's none. That's also alludes to the first question. In user-centric, there's no tie between streams and the per stream rate, because you could get €4 for one stream and you could get a hundredth of a cent for another stream. Your first question was about the distributors. There are distributors that are on board for SoundCloud. And yeah, can you maybe allude to what I haven't answered so far? Some are at least willing to test it with SoundCloud, and there's ongoing discussions, and there's others that are opposed to user-centric, and it's an ongoing conversation. And about what you can do as an artist, you cannot do, most artists cannot speak out publicly or won't be heard at least. So again, what you can do is go to your partners and be one of the artists that requests from them to find a position and to represent you if you think it's important. And one of the reasons I decided to try to explain this to artists specifically is because I think that's what needs to happen. Only when artists go to their partners, these partners will start to seriously consider even finding a position. I think we've been waiting for a long time, and not to implement user-centric, but just to educate everyone, even in the industry, even at the labels, about what it means and find a position.
All right. We had a question here on the right side.
Can you hear me? Yes. Thanks a lot for your talk. You talked about these three factors, A, B, and C. And which one has is the biggest lever, has the biggest impact?
Yeah.
Which one was it, A, B, or C?
It was B,
B?
the user commitment. I gotta say, we did not calculate that exactly. I don't want to go into math, but for us, it was more important right now towards artists in the state of the conversation to show that these three factors matter. If you know statistics and so on, the R² for the model with these three factors is 0.97, so it's almost 1, which is perfect. But we did not calculate a linear regression to calculate like how is user-centric 5 times more important than the other. But just looking at looking at the data, it's very clear that user commitment is the most important.
Okay, the factor B is
User commitment.
Average user commitment.
Loyalty, listening to only one artist.
Yeah, it's actually difficult to put names on this.
Yeah.
One of the things Universal criticizes about this is that if you have a user that has one stream, and of course that one stream is of a particular artist, you got a user commitment of 100%. Is that loyalty or is it just chance? So, but yeah, it's like sort of the idea. Sometimes I call it focus, sometimes call it commitment. Yeah.
And in your eyes, which factor is controllable by an artist the most? Is it A, B, or C?
I don't know. Probably nobody knows because it's not really what you do right now because it's not incentivized financially to try to figure that out. My first assumption would be to find new users. But again, you need to tie everything together. So you need to find users that pay a high subscription fee and try to get a high user commitment, if that's even possible. I think there's no better answer right now to that question.
Okay, thanks.
All right. I'm afraid we're running a little bit out of time, and session should start at 3 at the Pop Academy main building. So I would like to conclude here, and let's have a discussion afterwards with Ryan here. Make sure to read his study. It's excellent. I had a chance to read it before and participate in that discussion. One moment, we will start the sessions like 5 minutes later, like everybody, so that you can take time, relax, and go your ways. And many thanks to Ryan once again.